Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mansoor Arora from Lepton Software Solutions, and we welcome you all for today's webinar on Google Maps API Master Support. Our speaker for the day is Ms. Swapna Iyer. Ms. Swapna is the Customer Success Engineer with Google Maps team in Lepton. This session will be divided into two sessions with a Q&A session in between and at the end of the presentation. I would request you all to kindly type all your questions and queries in the Q&A window, and we will take them during the Q&A session. Now I would request Ms. Swapna to take the session forward with her presentation on the topic of the day. Ms. Swapna.
Thank you, Manswa. So moving forward with the presentation, as Manswa mentioned, we will be having two sessions. The first session would comprise of a brief description about the pay-as-you-go model, the asset tracking license, the APIs under the PAYG model, and how are they priced, the volumetric pricing, etc. We will also have another session, but before the session 2 starts, we will have a small Q&A session. In the session 2, we will talk about the API optimization techniques and certain best practices that you need to keep in mind while implementing the Google Maps API, after which we will have another QA session. So, what is the PAYG model? As the word says, it is the pay-as-you-go model. You pay for what you use. You are billed monthly in this. This new model is a change from the previous model, which was a premium model where certain quotas and certain credits were provided to each customer. Here, you can change your use cases, your APIs, and you are billed monthly for whatever you use. It is a post-paid billing model. Earlier, it was a prepaid billing model. The asset tracking license are used by customers where there are more than 20,000 or more active assets across all countries. Asset tracking license is mostly procured by those customers who are into commercial fleet management, logistics, or long-haul trucking, etc. The most important thing about asset tracking license that has to be kept in mind is the use case has to be approved by Google in order to procure this license. And the use case has to be explained in detail by the CTOs of the organization, after which it will be forwarded to the Google, and then it has to be approved by them in order to procure this license. When it comes to the APIs that are included in the asset tracking license, these are the APIs. One thing that needs to be kept in mind is Places API is not included under the asset tracking license. Another thing is each of these APIs are given 50 million calls completely and separately. Geocoding will have 50 million calls each, geolocation will have 50 million calls each, etc. Also, directions, basic and advanced, what these are, I will be explaining in the further slides. But directions basic will also be provided 50 million calls each, completely and separately, and directions advanced will also be provided with 50 million calls each, completely and separately. How Lepton adds value? Lepton has been the oldest and the largest Google Maps partner in Middle East and India. Lepton is a pioneer in providing location intelligence for the past 25 years now. It will provide you support for your technical and admin queries, and it has also gained the expertise in optimizing how you can use the Google Maps in your applications. The APIs under the Google Maps are majorly classified into three categories: maps, routes, and places. Maps will consist of these APIs: routes, directions, distance matrix, and roads. Places will comprise of the other APIs. I would also like to bring your attention to the QPS for each of these APIs. QPS are query per second limits. All of these APIs have certain query per second limits. In order to check what these limits are, please do visit the URL that is being showed on the screen right now. The limits have certainly changed for the APIs. For some of them, it has remained the same, but for some of them, it has changed in the new PAYG model. Please do visit the URL. We will now be covering each of these APIs in detail and as to what they encompass. Static maps, as the word suggests, is a map as an image. You cannot make any change on the map. A user cannot interact with static maps. Dynamic maps, you can interact with them. They are customizable maps. Users can pan and zoom, and panning and zooming on the maps are not charged. However, since you're using a dynamic maps, they are certainly more expensive than the static maps. So you need to revisit your use case and check whether you really have to use a dynamic map or not. Static Street View and Dynamic Street View are the same thing as static maps and dynamic maps, except you are provided with the Street View as well and a 360 panoramic or a thumbnail image of the entire Street View. But to bring to your attention, the Government of India does not allow the Street View applications to use. Next, we have the routes category. In the routes category, we have a lot of variations. The first one being the Directions API. Directions API will provide you the directions from origin A to origin B. Origin A to destination B. It is a simple direction API that is providing you the direction from point A to point B. In a basic call, you can get this direction call for up to 10 waypoints. However, if you happen to use more than 10 waypoints, or if you happen to use the optimized parameter in your application or code, or if you happen to access real-time traffic information or the ETA, expected time of arrival information in your code, it classifies as an advanced call. Directions advanced is basically not a different API per se, but these three parameters, these three classifications that I mentioned right now, the ETA, the traffic, the ETA is basically the traffic information, the optimized parameter, or more than 10 waypoints. Once you use these, it automatically classifies to become an advanced call. There is a stark difference when it comes to pricing as well. You are charged at $5 per 1,000 calls for a basic call and $10 per 1,000 calls for an advanced call. In a distance matrix API, what you get to do is you actually are finding out the duration and the distance between an origin array and a destination array. An origin array will consist of one or more places, and a destination array can also consist of one or more places. Now, as the word says, it is a matrix. For example, you have two places in the origin array and two places in your destination array. You will actually get four elements, 2 into 2. So 4 elements is basically 4 pairs, and for each of these pairs, you will get the duration and the distance, right? In an advanced call for distance matrix, if you are using the or accessing the real-time traffic information, if you're setting the departure time parameter is equal to now, that means you're using your traffic information in your code, it classifies to become an advanced call. There is again a stark difference between pricing. Roads API are basically when you need to track the GPS breadcrumbs. When there are certain GPS errors and you need to know where the vehicle has been traveling for the past 100 GPS points, the route traveled by these vehicles or the nearest roads that the vehicle was traveling on, then you need to use your roads API. They are both advanced calls and hence they are charged higher than the basic APIs. Places API over here needs this extra mention and extra explanation. We will first start with autocomplete implementation. Autocomplete is the intelligence that you use in your search widget. As soon as you click on the search widget, you are actually using the autocomplete feature under the Places API. Now there are two implementations that you can use in your application. One is the autocomplete with character or autocomplete with session ID. In autocomplete with character, you are charged for each of the characters that you enter on the search widget. Assume 6 characters are entered, then you are charged at $2.83 per 1,000 calls, and hence that will come to about 16.98, right? Now, moving on to the autocomplete session implementation. In an autocomplete session implementation, this has not been documented anywhere, but a session in the autocomplete feature with session implementation will go on for 2 minutes. So you can enter unlimited amount of characters in this. You can enter 40, 60, etc. You will not be charged for the amount of characters that you enter. Plus, there is a places details call that is also included in an autocomplete with session ID implementation. In an autocomplete with character implementation, a places detail call is not included. Hence, it becomes a cheaper implementation when you are using the autocomplete with session ID. However, certain use cases where you know that the user may not be entering uh, umpteen number of times on the search widget, autocomplete per character might be a cheaper option over there. Find place by text is a simple text search that you do. You find place by entering the text string. It can either be a phone number or an address, etc. But the input has to be a string. Uh, Text search, nearby search, and query autocomplete will include basic contact and atmosphere data in a places details call. What these buckets encompass, it is here. These are different buckets of data that will come under a places details call when you make a text search or a nearby search or a query autocomplete. They will always include basic contact and atmosphere data. A text search is basically uh, when you are entering ambiguous addresses. Nearby searches are where you are entering, where you are searching for a nearby place. You specify a radius and then you search for that place around that radius. And query autocomplete is basically another feature of the places autocomplete, but here the IntelliSense offers a query completion, right? For example, if you're searching pizza near New Delhi, then you will have query IntelliSense offered in the autocomplete feature. A places details call can give you basic contact and atmosphere data, all of them together. However, contact and atmosphere are charged at a higher price. So if you do not need the operating hours or the rating of a certain place, you need to be specific and you need to specify a fields parameter in your places details call and specify only those parameters that you need. For example, if you need the address or the maps URL or the viewport, please make sure you're calling only these three parameters so that you do not incur extra charge for contact and atmosphere. If you omit the fields parameter, then all of these details are present in a places details call and that will incur an extra charge for you, which will become expensive. Moving on, there are certain amount of free monthly quota provided to each customer, and in that $200 free monthly quota, these are the things that are offered. One thing that I would like to bring to your attention is that native map loads in Android and iOS both are free completely. The other things have certain limits and they have been specified over here. Here is an example where a user or an application has 1,000 users per month interaction with these APIs under it. So if, for example, they are making all the 1,000 users are making 10 geocoding calls, right? So 10 into 1,000 into $5 per 1,000 calls. Geocoding first year has $5 per 1,000 calls. This way, the entire calculation for all the 1,000 users and for these APIs comes to about $71 per month. However, like I said, you are provided with $200 free monthly quota, and since your usage in this example is less than $200 per month, In one way, you are actually not going to pay anything. This usage will be free. This is just an example to show that if you actually optimize your APIs, then your usage might fall below that bracket. I will get back to all the questions in the Q&A session. Once we finish the pricing, we can answer all the questions, right? Now, coming back to the tier pricing and the pricing of how these APIs is calculated, we are going to take the example of 1.5 million geocodes per month. If, for example, your application is making 1.5 million, that tantamounts to 15 lakh geocodes per month. Had you been using, since you're a customer already, but just to bring to your attention again, had you been using only the Google Maps from the Google Maps platform itself and not through a partner, you would have been priced at the two most expensive tiers, which is tier 1 and tier 2. So the first 1 lakh calls are charged at $5 per 1,000 calls, and the next 14 lakhs will be charged at $4 per 1,000 calls. So your entire usage would have been charged at $6,100 per 1,000 calls. However, since you are a partner to Lepton, the volumetric pricing discount has been offered and the further tiers have unlocked and the cheaper tiers are now present for you. So the first 1 lakh are charged at $5 per 1,000 calls. That tantamounts to 500 USD. Then next 4 lakh at $4 per 1,000 calls. So that comes to about 1,600. Then next 5 lakh at $3, and hence that tantamounts to 1,500 and so forth. So these are the tiers. First tier will have 1 lakh calls. Second tier will have 4 lakh calls. Third tier will have 5 lakh calls, and so on and so forth. These are how the tiers have been priced and placed for each of these APIs. This is just for the geocoding API. For all the other APIs, there are different charges. However, the number of calls in the tier for all the APIs remain the same. Here I'm just giving you an example for the Places API calculation as well. I've given you an example for the autocomplete per request. Again, over here, the first tier is charged at $2.83 per 1,000 calls and so forth. Atmosphere data, contact data, I have highlighted again just to bring to your attention that they are charged at a higher price. So in case you do not need them, you don't have to include them in your code. So this brings an end to our first session. So we can answer all the queries right now.
So the first question we have is from Purvish.
Uh, the upper limit is 25 waypoints for directions advance call. Hi Purvish, answer to your query. Yeah. So I'm moving on to the next question, and is this 10 calls per 1,000 users per day? Yes. If you're talking about the example, yes. So it is 10 calls per 1,000 users for geocoding API. You're right. You're understanding it correct. Yeah. We'll make that change. Thank you for your feedback.
Any other questions for up to this point of time? Any of queries or questions anyone has, or we can move on to the next part of the webinar.
All
I
right.
think we can move on because there are no more questions coming in. So, Swapna, you can continue.
Okay. So moving on how you can optimize your APIs. I had covered most of these points in my earlier slides as well, but to bring to your attention again, you need to visit your use case so you can manipulate your single map loads. If there are certain static map loads that can open with a certain zoom level and center level, and if that can suffice your use case, you can skip off using a dynamic map load and use a static map load instead, because that will be cheaper. You can use a single map load instead of loading multiple map loads on a page. And again, native map loads, like I said, are free. So if you're developing your applications for your Android and iOS applications, then it is always better and much cheaper for your application as well. For directions API, if you're making advanced calls, for example, in one request, you're making an advanced call where you have 11 waypoints, and in other directions basic call, you're using 8 waypoints, you can balance the load. You can move your waypoints such that you're having 10 over here and 10 over in the next call, so that that tantamounts to become 2 basic calls instead of calling an advanced call. Kindly minimize the use of parameter departure time if your application does not need traffic information. You need not use the departure time parameter at all, and you will not be charged for directions advanced call. As far as caching is concerned, you can cache the lat longs and the place ID for up to 30 calendar days. You will have to delete your cached results after 30 days. This is mandatory. You can only cache your data, that is lat long and place ID. You cannot cache the corresponding address for 30 calendar days. As far as distance matrix API is concerned, I had explained that the calculation for distance matrix API is done on the concept of elements. You are charged as well on the concept of elements and not on the number of requests that you make. So if you have one origin and 2 destination, that makes a matrix of 1 into 2 is equal to 2. You will be charged for 2 elements. While consuming the roads API, please reduce the frequency of snap to roads and nearest roads calls that you're making. Also reduce the frequency of speed limit calls that you make. Under roads API as well, you can cache the lat long and place ID for only up to 30 calendar days. While consuming the geocoding API, in order to resolve ambiguous addresses, it is always better to use the autocomplete feature under the Places API that I had covered in detail. You can use your character or session implementation. You can choose whichever suits your use case. But it is always better to resolve the ambiguous addresses instead of making a geocoding call directly. Under the geocoding API as well, you can cache lat longs and place ID for up to 30 calendar days. Places API, when you're actually making a places details call, under a places details call, the place ID can be cached indefinitely. Here you can cache a places ID indefinitely under a places detail call. The difference between session ID and places autocomplete with characters implementation, I've already covered in my previous slides. Consider using the fields parameter as I had explained in order to not incur contact and atmosphere data. This is just a summary of all the details of what can be cached and for how long. Moving on to how you can set alerts for your project or your account. You can specify budget alerts as well as API capping alerts. To bring to your attention over here, budget alerts are only an alert email that are sent for certain percentages of the budget that you have specified. Here, the budget that is specified and the alerts that trigger are at 50% of 2397 US dollars, right? When 50% of 2397 US dollars are consumed, alert emails will be sent to the billing account administrators or users. But this does not stop the project to consume more APIs. These are only alert emails that are sent. Setting a budget alert does not cap API usage. In order to do that, that is also possible if you need to put a hard stop on how you can use your APIs. You can go to your particular project, you can go to the hamburger menu, you can go to your APIs and surfaces option under the hamburger menu, and you can go to library. Under the library, you can select and see what all APIs have been enabled for your project. And once you select a certain API, this page opens up, and under this page you can specify the limits that you need to specify for that particular API. So advanced map loads per day, if you need to set a hard code limit that only 100 advanced map loads are to be made per day, then please specify and change your limit over there. You can also specify the limits for per 100 seconds, and you can also specify per 100 seconds per user. These are hard stops that you are providing for each of these APIs. This is another page that I would like to bring to your attention. Here you can view your entire usage for your project. In order to reach this page, you will have to go to the billing tab. You can go to the billing tab on clicking on the hamburger menu. You will see a billing tab. Once you go to the billing tab, you will go to the linked billing account for your particular project. Once that opens, this page will open up. You can move to the reports tab. Once you click on the reports tab, this page opens up and you can see the entire usage for your particular project. The filters that you can see on the screen right now on the right, you can specify a time range under which you need to see your use case, you need to see your usage. Under the group by filter, you can specify product, SKU, project. So group by SKU will provide you the information for each of the stock keeping unit. So that is the most granular information that you can see. So if you're making directions, advanced calls, how many of those calls are being made, the usage for that, etc. Right? If you're making directions basic, advanced map loads, dynamic map loads, all of these things you can actually see under group by SKU. There are other filters as well. You can see group by product. Under group by product, you will be able to see your usage under each of the APIs. But SKU will provide you a more granular information if you're using autocomplete feature, all of these, and how much of these have been used by your project, you will be able to see under group by SKU. Moving on to certain best practices while implementing Google Maps APIs. Please never use an unrestricted API key. Do monitor your API key for anomalies. Make sure you are revisiting your code again and again so that there are no bugs and they're not making unnecessary API calls. In order to restrict your API key, you can again go to the hamburger menu, move to APIs and services, and go to credentials. Once you click on credentials, you will come to a screen where you can click on a button which specifies plus create credential, create key, etc. Once you click on that, a new key will be created. Once you create a key, you can then select a key, and once you select the key, this page will open up. Now when it comes to restricting your keys, application restrictions for one API key pertains to only one application restriction. So if you want one API key to be restricted to Android apps, it can only restrict to those Android app restrictions that you application restrictions. Multiple HTTP referrers, IP addresses, and Android apps restrictions for one key cannot be given. You'll have to create multiple keys in order to restrict them to certain applications. However, if you need to restrict multiple APIs to a certain key, you can do that. One key can restrict n number of APIs over there. Like in the example provided, you can restrict multiple APIs for a particular key. So this brings an end to our session. We can now take up the questions.
Thank you, Ms. Swapna, for the insightful presentation. We would now begin a Q&A session and respond to your queries. I would request all of you to kindly type in any questions or queries you have in the Q&A window for Ms. Swapna to answer them. And we have the first question that is from Mr. Abhiraj. But before that, I just want to say to Mr. Khalid, who is here, that we received your question on the email, but your question is to be answered in a detail. So we will send you the answer to that on the email itself. So the first question is from Abhiraj, which is the GCP 300 USD free usage is different from the
Yes.
maps?
Hi, Abhiraj. Thank you for your question. Yes, the GCP $300 usage will be different from the MAPS $200 free usage. They are different products under Google. So that will be different. Yes. Hi, Purvish Kumar Patel. Yes, the $200 credit applied. The $200 monthly discount is already applied to the invoice that you receive from Lepton. Yes. Hi, Pratik. You are absolutely right. If you just have to show a marker on your current location, then you can always go with static map. That is much cheaper instead of going for a dynamic map. That will be a perfect resolution. Uh, Only the place ID can be cached and not the autocomplete result. I'm answering to Matani. Only the place ID can be cached, and the place ID also can be cached for 30 days. Only 30 days.
Any further questions do we have from the attendees? Guys, you can also send in us your questions on the email ID on the slide, that is marketing@leptonsoftware.com. We can also connect you with the expert over the email in case you don't have any questions right now and you want to ask something later on. So we are always available. Any more questions, or we can move forward to end the session for the day? Okay, I think so. There are no more questions. So I would like to thank Ms. Swapna again for providing answers to all the questions, and I would like to thank the audience for today. We will be sharing the recording of this session with all of you over the email for your future reference. We look forward to your attendance on our next Google Maps API Master Support webinar on 12th of March. And again, as I mentioned earlier, if you have any queries or questions, you can write to us at marketing@leptonsoftware.com. Thank you and have a great day ahead. Goodbye.